Chapter 11. Ultras. To get an understanding of Italian football supporters, ultras more specifically, and their love for football, it'll help when reading anything that gives an insight to their world if you replace a few words and terms. Fanatical equals passionate. Extremist equals supporter, and the very word itself. Ultra equals to live and die for your club, literally. But as well as their level of commitment and obsession with the game, it's also important to understand Italians as a culture and how they view and appreciate life and absorb everything they come in contact with, but I'll get to that later. To say football is the epitome of local and popular passion in everything they do and believe in is an understatement. There are a few stories giving claim to the start or birthplace of the name Ultras and the type of dedicated supporter. One of the most commonly accepted is said to have begun in Milan's Curva Sud with the Fossa dei Leoni in 1968. On a side note, there's no disputing of the bitter generation-long rivalry between Fossa dei Leoni, AC Milan, and their arch-rivals Boys San, Inter Milan, as being one of the biggest. In the late 60s, a lot of other ultra groups were founded as far north as the south, and their ideals and existence weren't reserved to just one or two of the main highly populated cities throughout the country. By the 1970s, there wasn't one Italian team in the three highest divisions, Serie A, B and C, who did not have an ultra group among their followers. If you were to look up the word ultra, it'll probably give you a standard linear interpretation and tell you that it is the Italian term for beyond the borders, and how this description dictates that ultras are more than just normal fans on every level imaginable. But remember, with the Italians, there's a level of heritage and cultural identity that's always missed, and their appreciation of the game easily supersedes that of a simple three-worded claim and attempt at encapsulating a sport held as close to their hearts as you can only begin to imagine. To be an ultra, you will have been born and bred with a belief that your sole purpose is to support and carry your team until the end. Ultras as a group were built and formed around a core of founders, demanding that same level and desire to bond on a single belief. Typical traits include that of any anti-establishment philosophy, a bit of a rascal and revolutionist, and someone that can't be told where to sit and on what level or volume they're allowed to support their team. Your following was a result of where you were born geographically, and also came from the local town square centred of these same groups. A game steward has no chance of telling an ultra of how little or in what capacity he's going to make his part of the world be known. A very high percentage were born of the working class, so the cheapest tickets meant a real community bonding and following. Since its ultra's start, in many ways the usage and story about ultras isn't solely about football, but a shared one incorporating Italian subculture inspired by it. Both political and religious fundamentalism are the backbone of each ultras group, some more than others. Like most subcultures in the UK, they identify with their upbringing that have influences within both local and domestic history. For one reason or another, there's been a mutual respect and camaraderie with Italian football supporters and West Ham throughout the years, and none stronger than with myself and different factions of ultras throughout Italy. I'm sure there's some truth that with Paolo Di Canio joining the West Ham squad back in 1999, and his commendable level of loyalty and natural skill helped any future friendship between Lazio and the Hammers. But as I found out through first-hand experience, the Italians and ultras is a bonding and friendship between different countries, clubs and myself that is one I've never seen or heard of anywhere else in the world, and little did I know that in future years, Lazio would be my first stepping stone into Italy and ultras as a whole. My liking of Italian football and their level of passion, if that can be a strong enough word, was first realised back when Channel 4 first started televising Italian football in the 90s. One team in particular I liked right off the bat, how they carried themselves and came across, SS Lazio, who to me, like a lot of Italian teams, were an embodiment of football and passion, but at the time there was something that bit extra I saw and felt about the team and the fans that I liked. They say first impressions count, and thinking back to one of the first times I got to hear and see the Italian fans' response, show of raw emotion and expression, the noise and involvement was on a level I'd typically only seen in English clubs during a big derby or playoff. Except the Italians were like this every single game, week in, week out. Of course, I had my own bias view that none were louder or more passionate than 8,000. 10,000 West Ham loyal on an away game to Man U, singing Bubbles, drowning out the feeble attempts of a sing-song the Cockney Reds were putting out. Not long after I was first exposed to Lazio and Italian football, I also got to hear the name Fabrizio Piscitelli. He was a very heavily respected face and main lad within Lazio Ultras. There was a documentary on both him and the accusations of countrywide involvement in corruption, crime, and the team organisation itself. Just the Ultras' passion and influence rang home with me and West Ham. Their team and the results they produce is something they take very personally. I think by many standards they see the team as a reflection of who they are and what they believe in. So, when the Lazio team wasn't performing to a standard that was expected by the locals, Fabrizio headed 1,500 fans to the training ground to express their issues and frustration with the trainer, manager and team. Again, that's just the tip of the iceberg on what football is and means to them. That same passion, love, devotion, involvement, call it what you will, it's something that is born within you and part of your DNA. It can be compared to as the heart and soul of the team and club. You say fanatical. That's not even close. Imagine an English lad in the 70s and early 80s when that first seed was planted, disguised as a piece of leather and cleverly shaped as a ball. The root and core of love for the game was born from there. And Ultras, it's one carried on a monumental level until they reach the grave. Devotion and commitment is the path for a true Ultra. There is no in-between. It's been in the newspapers as much as on the TV in the past, how politicians, business owners, club presidents are as much fans of the teams as they were reachable and part of Ultras and their club involvement. They're all intertwined, and their business dealings and strong ties eventually led to a government crackdown and the corruption that was said to exist. But, as with some firms in the UK having undertones in crime and the like, in Italy, it's again on a massive national level. The mafia originated in Italy. The mafia's very existence is one that is deep-rooted in the country. All that goes on, and with the strong numbers in Ultras, all I'll say is they might be different branches, but they're all part of the same tree. No football hooligan in the world can pull the respect and weight like an Ultra, and I don't think it'll ever change. My story and welcoming into the world of Ultras started with what must be at least 10, if not more, years ago, when Cass called to tell me he'd been contacted by a couple of Lazio's main lads. Alexandro, who was top man at the time, had invited us out to Rome for Lazio versus Juventus home game and to meet Lazio Ultras' main firm. Later, and after meeting up with the main firm, they'd said how they was trying to get hold of me, but it was near impossible. Cass had started to be a bit more public with his projects, and as a result was more reachable. I simply swerved social media at the time. That simply wasn't me. They said they'd heard of us and seen how we carried ourselves. And let's be honest, it was no secret, and we were far from shy in openly telling the whole of the UK our willingness to fight for what we believed in. I'm not 100%, but I've always believed they saw a bit of themselves in what and how we demonstrated our side of things, and they now wanted to share their world with us. It could be said, birds of a feather, or great minds think alike. Now you don't even have to be aware of the level of extremism that exists within some factions, hence the word ultra. But knowing how politics and political leanings are employed with Italian football supporters, beliefs and way of life, then visiting the home end, Cass not being your typical fan within the community, was something that should have been on anyone's mind. But, as a testament to the respect and hospitality of Lazio Ultras, to see a parting of thousands of people when entering the curve and brought to the front, reserved exclusively for the top boys, was a sign of both respect and welcoming, and that was appreciated. We were treated with the utmost of respect, nothing less. It was during this visit that I also discovered just how much of a following and support West Ham have, but I'll come back to that later. The radio station visit involved us being interviewed for a couple of hours, thankfully with an interpreter and an endless number of supporters showing up. The whole trip was very impressionable, and I couldn't have been made to feel more welcome, so much that I was asked to come back and roll with the main firm. Being allowed access to an Ultras group is on the same level as receiving an invitation to their home or a close family event. It's a place that is held sacred, and the curve is their home and their sanctuary. It's a reflection of their beliefs, ideals, their very soul and existence. Sounds extreme. You have to understand that an Ultra's life is more than just the game. It's what and who you support on every level, in not only your life, but those around you, family, friends and fellow Ultras, and nothing is done in half measures even if there's an errand that needs sorting. Someone within the same Ultras that you go to a match with is probably going on that errand with you. It's not a matter of why are the same people you see at football involved in every aspect of your lives. It's why aren't they? Your neighbours, brother, brother-in-law, nephew, son, all part of the circle of people and who will undoubtedly stand alongside with you in the curve. They are brothers in arms, and like all passionate supporters, ultras maintain a mindset where if there's an argument internally over a flag, banner, your right to defend the player, coach or manager will include a deep-rooted level of politics that will be infused and part of everything talked about. And it's here an ultras relationship can always be on edge. It was by the next invitation and visit that I noticed how serious and accommodating ultras were at being hosts, as the same level of hospitality and welcoming seen on the first trip was equally as much, if not more, on this one. Nothing was an issue, and everyone couldn't do any more than they already were to make me feel welcomed. Once again, I was invited to their clubhouse, reserved for ultras top firm, where I did another radio interview, again all presented very professionally and supporting of what I'd been involved in. What impressed me was not just the support they showed for my book, Muscle, but also Rise of the Foot Soldier, simply because the Foot Soldier film hadn't been released in Italy, and yet it still gained a massive amount of support. What also impressed me was the volume of ultras in the Curva Nord that were sporting West Ham scarves, caps and badges. I say this because anyone that follows or is part of any ultras will know and tell you of the loyalty and devotion solely to their own club, and then to take another team into their hearts. The value and support for an East London club, and the way they openly showed it, that meant something and said a lot about the fans. Even before the closing of this visit, I was once again invited back, and through each and every following visit, we built up a stronger friendship that ensured that I'd be invited back again. It was on one particular visit, and the last game of the season, Lazio's top man, Fabrizio Piscitelli, who I'd seen in a documentary back in the 90s and met prior, he was in prison when I visited some years before, had organised a massive street party. During the day was the Roma derby, and it was here, before and after the game, we were walking the streets around the Stadio Olimpico, Olympic Stadium, as all the roads had been blocked off by the local police, which then gave his firm free range to come and go in the local city streets. The rumour was Roma fans were supposed to be turning up with a big firm and looking for a row, but in equal, if not more measure, this was Lazio Ultras manner, and no one was going to outdo them, especially now that their top boy was back. Fabrizio and Lazio Ultras were going to send a message and make it known that he was back and wasn't fucking about. Lazio Ultras' presence is spread far and wide, and even to other countries, and within the Lazio ranks were some heavy-duty, high-ranking neo-Nazis, who apparently maintained high-placed positions within other extremist factions in their own countries and regions, as they did here within Ultras Curve. Needless to say, Roma's firm never turned up. To be in the thick of that level of passion, not so much the politics, reminded me of my early days with the ICF and walking the streets on a Saturday, pre and post a West Ham game, but I will add this. Here they were very organised and made sure everyone knew their responsibility and place, constantly shouting and securing the lines. It was with military precision. The chants, the pulling of ranks into line, it was as if they were rallying soldiers all together and into formations. It reminded me of the films I'd seen over the years of Roman legions and their generals leading them into battle. But instead of armour and spears, it was designer gear and Lazio chants. Powerful stuff, and much like the infamous shouting out of ICF, ICF, ICF back home, their several minute-long Lazio chants were like a surge of energy with each line and verse. And with each song and chant, it was like someone was putting petrol on a fire. It infused a level of power that you felt through your body. It even got my chest inflated a few inches, and made me feel like I was invincible, an unfucking believable feeling, and like I said earlier, they take on everything they do with a high level of passion and invest a huge amount of dedication. It was raw emotion and love for the game. No one was interested in photos that would lead to false stories. It was about each and every person's cultural obligation in preserving and showing love for a flag, a banner and a group of people that celebrated as much as they felt the loss collectively. And as an Englishman looking in at this world, it didn't matter the language barrier. It wasn't about the differences in the spelling and soundings of words. It was about a group of people and their involvement in a shared belief and goal. It was much like here as with a lot of other visits. I really understood their level of involvement and what they were doing, and being in the thick of it with their top boy, Fabrizio, was even better. I really enjoyed being around him. His passion and love for what he did was on a level you just had to admire. I got on really well with him, and like I said a moment ago, each and every visit was something else, and being in his company showed me just how much he truly loved, supported and respected a team, a belief and those around him. The community's willingness and involvement showed and highlighted both his power and presence within Lazio Ultras, and in a style of their own making. Everything and everyone was part of what was going on, a real carnival atmosphere, the smells of the different foods, the sounds, coming from every direction and the energy from the people all around you. I mean, just imagine thousands of people enjoying themselves, and in on the street party. There were stalls that circled the whole way around the ground, a music stage for performances, and even a London red double-decker bus driving up and down the street, completely wrapped in Lazio, West Ham and ICF flags. It really was just unimaginable. It was only after I was invited on stage and handed the mic, I realised I knew very little Italian, but what I did know was shouted out and they went fucking wild. Then, on top of all that, to have thousands singing "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles" just blew my mind. You can't begin to imagine the feeling and level of gratitude I have for these people and their willingness to accommodate me and share their love of the game and their culture. I was surrounded by the whole community, who was there openly sharing their world, which they made you feel was also now mine. During the street party, I noticed a large group of men standing by one of the roadblocks. Like I said earlier, everything had been blocked off by the local police, and they'd used these big barriers in preventing vehicles in driving up and down the streets. It wasn't long after I noticed them looking in my direction, and I was asked to come over and meet what I later learned was Inter Milan Ultras. There was about 100 of their top boys that had massed near where I was standing. When I walked over, one particular member caught my eye, a black bloke standing amongst them. It was only as I got closer that I then heard the same black bloke greet me with an English accent. "You're Carlton Leach, Rise of the Foot Soldier." He then introduced himself as Ken. He explained he'd been living out here for a good few years and the Inter firm would like to meet me. I was introduced to some of the top boys, Franco, Moreno and a few of what are known as the old boys, the Vikings and a few others. As much like West Ham, Ultras have different factions, whose members are of different generations and age groups, and each generation has its own firm. It was during this conversation that I was invited to visit Milan on my next trip and to stay with Ken, who would take me to meet the whole Inter firm. As much as Ultras can have extreme views, some, if not most, actually align and have the same beliefs. Lazio and Inter Milan Ultras were of the same mindset and are closely affiliated, basically cousins, best mates, same beliefs, politically, culturally, and every sense of the way the same philosophy. In some respects, I guess you could say it's like there are two capitals in the country, Milan in the north and Rome south of them. Rome, of course, is known and listed as the capital of Italy, but Milan can be said to be the financial capital. There's an understanding and respect between Lazio and Inter Ultras, and as it's said, when either of the Ultras visit each other's city, they're not away fans, they're our guests. Like all of my visits, whether I was in either a wine bar or a lovely restaurant, I was always in the best company and having the time of my life. And here I was, an East Ender, born and raised from a humble working-class background, now in another country being wined and dined. They treated me like one of their own, family, and like I said in the opening of this chapter, it's their approach and doing of things as a culture and a country that gives you an understanding of their involvement with football and what they embrace in their lives as a whole. When you're meeting and spending time with friends and family in Italy, you truly start to get a sense of what and how they operate. Having conversations, how they meet and discuss things isn't done on something as impersonal as a mobile phone. Italians do things on a very sociable level. They will meet up at a restaurant. They will take the time in sitting down to have wine, beer, food and talk one-on-one. Whether it's football, family or the people and the day they're involved in, it's all about tasting life through experience, not some falsity like a quick chat in passing by. It was in the middle of all of this, when I got a message from within the firm that someone wanted to talk to me outside. When I stepped outside the restaurant, there were two high-ranking Lazio Ultras in a brand new Porsche Panamera. No sooner than I jumped in, we shot off, hurtling down the road at neck-breaking speed. Not long into the journey, the brightly lit and full of energy populated streets soon turned into dimly lit, lifeless roads. We then slowly pulled into what looked like a working-class area. Having a quick look around at my new surroundings, it looked no different than a massive council estate back home, but there wasn't a single soul or living thing anywhere. It was completely silent. It was as if I'd landed on an uninhabited planet. It wasn't long after 1 a.m, and here I am, sitting in a easily 150k motor with two very high-ranking ultras. Not a fucking clue where I was or what the plan is. I'm a very confident person and have been in situations and places a lot worse, but the fact remained I was not in Kansas anymore. No backup, no tool, but knowing who I was amongst was enough assurance that if anything went sideways, we'd come out on top. I had another look outside the car windows, trying to get a look of what was around me, but it was near impossible. Just grey, poorly lit buildings, endless silhouetted blocks and alleyways all around us. This was a far cry from the beautiful, warm-lit, full of character, picture postcard-type buildings and surroundings I was enjoying not long ago. We'd gone from hot to cold in a matter of minutes, and here I was, in the middle of something. It didn't help that my understanding of the Italian language was at best only enough to say hello and thank you. Even after a few minutes, still no cars passed, and not a single person could be seen in any direction, until one of the lads muttered something and pointed in a direction where a shadowy figure appeared and was walking towards the car. Both lads were now smiling and seemed happy that whoever this person was had now arrived. Throwing a package inside the car, the mystery character then disappeared as quickly as he appeared. Immediately they started to open it up and began offering the contents. I won't incriminate myself or those whose company I was in, but the illicit commodity now in my lap and literally under my nose would have got me a stretch only familiar to that of a major high-profile trafficker back home. Thoughts and ambitions to get back to the warmth and sanctuary of big buildings and Italian restaurants would have been more than an ambition for anyone, but as they say, when in Rome. One little story that's worth mentioning is how jealousy and politics can play a role even when you're in the perfect of settings. It was on a visit when Inter Milan were playing at home, and like countless times before I was in country by invitation. I'd made the effort in taking some people out to Italy so as to introduce them to Lazio Ultras. The introductions, insight and their very presence was only as a result of my doing. The same people I had taken, as I suspected, now felt it was necessary to try and discredit me and say things about me behind my back. This was seen as a level of disrespect by a lot of people, and none more than by my hosts. The downside for those that had something to say about me was it actually had the reverse affect, as their efforts, in an attempt in putting me below them, only then made them look bad. This was all reaffirmed when I got a call from a high-ranking Lazio Ultra bringing me up to speed. When people act that way, it always says more about them than it does about the person they're attempting to make lesser. The feeling of success and wealth is typically only reserved for those that actually have it, but the feeling of respect and power was something I observed whenever I was in the company of these men. When you walk firm-handed, with what must have been at least 10 high-ranking ultras, into one of the busiest, largest, totally packed-out restaurants, it was people wall to wall, then to have the owner personally come out to greet you, have a massive table magically appear and set up, where there was only floor space just seconds ago, tells you you're amongst top-tier people. And if that wasn't enough, the owner would only allow both him and his son to wait on you, ensuring the service was nothing short of perfect, and you would all return to his restaurant. Over the years, the friendship between us all has gone from strength to strength, so the first opportunity I got, I returned the same level of hospitality, when myself and a pal, Dave D, flew Fabrizio and some of Lazio's top boys over for the championship playoff, when West Ham played Blackpool at Wembley. We put them up in hotels, made sure everyone ate and had a box at the game, and really made the effort in making sure they knew their friendship was valued on the same level. Whatever side of the channel I met up with Fabrizio and his boys, it was always the best you could wish for. A really good friend, whose visits and time spent with are those I'll always remember. It wasn't long after that I took Ken up on his offer, and a return visit to Italy was on the cards, and no sooner had I just finished unpacking from my Rome visit, I was now packing away the basics for a trip back to Italy, more specifically, Milan. But this trip I decided would be a bit different, as I wanted it to be more about Italy as a culture and not just football. It was out of season anyway, and the last thing I wanted was to take any West Ham political baggage along for the new experience. So I decided to take along one of my best mates, Lenny. One of the things I wanted to share with a close mate of 25 plus years was how much the Italian culture and ultras had made such a strong and lasting impression on me. I'm a proud born and raised East London lad. West Ham is in my heart and soul. My blood runs claret and blue, and it always will. But there was something about ultras, their love for the game, and how they'd taken me into their hearts and lives, that gave me such a sense of pride in saying I'm a welcomed part of that. In addition, I wanted to show what I called my new love affair with a country, and I wanted to share that with someone I called family. I guess the feeling was much like scoring the winning goal at the school football match, or winning a trophy as a kid. You'd want to run home and proudly tell your dad or an older brother of what you'd experienced, discovered or achieved. On the flight over, Lenny, who'd never been to Italy, and being this was a whole new experience, asked what obvious questions would be. What if this is a setup? I mean, you're Carlton Leach. We don't speak any Italian. What if this goes sideways? How well do you know the bloke who we're staying with? And on top of all that, Lenny isn't West Ham, he's a Tottenham fan. We all have one dark secret. Now, if I'm being honest, I could have really wound him up, making up stories about visiting Italy for the first time, that this or that could happen, but, as I assured Lenny, I knew in my heart these were honest people, their intentions were coming from a good place, and above all, I've been around and taken on board by the top people in Italy. If there was any thought or chance of being mugged off, they wouldn't have allowed it. Plus, I've always been of that mindset, where I don't always plan things out, or overthink about a venue or building I'm entering. If I'd thought like that during any part of my life, I'd not seen half of what I have and missed out on some blinding experiences. I believe that you can't always rely on the light in a dark place. We got settled in at Ken's place and was soon being introduced to a few of the main faces of Inter's firm. A lot of the top-tier ultras were away and spending time in their holiday homes scattered around the country. But the good thing about this visit was the time I spent there, and the lads that I did get to meet not only allowed me to relax and immerse myself in Italian culture and way of life, but also spend personal one-on-one time with them. Plus, even out of season, there was plenty of football talk. Nino, Cesco, Franco, Moreno, Jerry to name, but a few welcomed us from day one with open arms, and much like when I was visiting Lazio Ultras, even before we'd left the company of our hosts in Milan, we were invited back, and the next visit was to be an even bigger one. The next visit couldn't have come soon enough, and it was nice to see there were some like-minded people who enjoyed and identified with the passion displayed by the Italian fans, as during the flight I was approached by some young Cardiff lads who wanted to simply say hello and ask if they could get a photo with me. I had to take my hat off to them. I mean, committing to a flight and travelling overseas to watch a game is commendable on many levels. So, fair play to Josh, Newt and their two mates, and as further credit to them, we've stayed in touch since. When both Lenny and I got to Milan, it couldn't have gone any better, as straight away we're amongst the top boys, once again including Franco, Jerry, Tony, Moreno, Nino, Cesco, and all of the top boys, an entire Inter firm. The language barrier was a question from Lenny on a previous flight, but as he found out, when we arrived and started to get introduced and be around the main firm, friendship and passion for the game broke down a lot of barriers, plus a lot of people spoke English. So what blanks existed were quickly filled in. So, here we are again, front and centre, and like I said earlier, this was a big one. It was the first game of the season, so everyone is buzzing with energy and all fired up, and to top it all off, it's a derby game, meaning it's a full turnout of all their firm. Inter were going to be out in serious numbers for this game, and I mean from the top to the bottom. In layman terms, the CEOs, managing directors, managers, supervisors, general staff, the whole infrastructure was present and accounted for. Being invited to go at the front of any curve is beyond an honour and privilege, but to be referred to as El Capitan and stood in a place that is only open to those that have spent decades in, giving nothing less than blood, sweat and tears, going through what is called an apprenticeship, and on top of that to be recognised amongst those natural born within those ranks is something else. Plus, the funny side of it was again Lenny, who wasn't even football in that respect, and being held at the front, to my side, and as my number two at the curve become a personal joke between us. Leaving the game is bittersweet. I mean, how can you want to walk away from that experience and not think, how can that ever be beaten? But a few days partying, spending and enjoying time amongst Inter's top boys was much appreciated, and one I have enjoyed many times since. I quickly learned not to rush unpacking when I arrived back in the UK, as within a couple of weeks, I was back amongst Inter and Lazio for a game between the two teams. Now, Lazio Ultras would be in town, and news of this to anyone would then be forced to ask, at minimum, what and how will this turnout go, knowing of both my close relationship and friendship with both ultra groups? When Lazio Ultras did turn up, it was one massive meet. It was like your favourite cousins had come round for Sunday dinner or to celebrate a special occasion, and like I said earlier, Lazio and Inter are very closely aligned in all aspects of football, culture and beliefs. They all met up in bars and restaurants on Inter's manor, and every time you'd see one of Inter's firm, there would be Lazio's lads mingling amongst the crowd. Interestingly enough, Inter fans would often wear a Lazio cap or top when their cousins south of them were visiting their city and stadium as a sign of respect, and as a sign of how much I was welcomed in Rome. The Lazio Ultras were happy to see me with our shared family in Milan. When news came of Inter Milan playing Tottenham at home in the Europa Cup, it was without question I was going to make sure my Inter family were taken care of, in-house and up front. When I was given the names of those visiting, I couldn't have been happier. Jerry, Franco, Moreno and his lovely Mrs. Chiara and a few others. The news made it feel like Christmas had come early, and more importantly, it was another chance for me to return the hospitality I'd received from them. One main hurdle existed though, that being Moreno was on a travel ban for away games, but not in a million years was I going to let something as trivial as a piece of paper and a judge come in between our brother from seeing our beloved team play, as when it comes to doing the right thing, I've always considered it an honour, and I'll always commit and come through on anything when it comes to people I consider as family, each and every time, no question. Jerry was travelling and staying with the main Inter firm in London, but with Moreno bringing his missus, Chiara, there was no question that they, much like all of Inter's top boys, would receive the same level of hospitality they'd always extended to me. We had them picked up from the airport, and we even stayed in the same hotel that we set them up in at Southend. I wanted to make sure everything was always taken care of. A phone call away wasn't personal enough for me. It was all about attention to detail, and things had to be done properly. Restaurants, places and faces. This was, like the many times before and after, my way of showing my appreciation for how much I regarded them as family. When it came time to the game, like I've mentioned, Jerry was travelling with Inter Ultras, but Morena couldn't simply stroll into the visitors' end and be with the main firm. As sure as I'm sitting here, I know that the local authorities would have spotters out and looking for known people, but nonetheless, we made sure he was at the game, and in style. So a favour was called in, and I had them in a box, allowing them to watch the whole game without threat or interruption from either the local plod or an ambitious Tottenham fan. Again, we had to avoid any attention to his presence. Plus, this was a family one. What a game that was. Lenny, me, and our guests loved it. A brilliant day with lovely people, and needless to say, they really enjoyed themselves throughout. But again, as a testament to a special friendship and level of respect and appreciation between both Inter Ultras and myself, the next thing that happened, to this day, is still one for the books. It was whilst we were all still in the box at Tottenham's ground that a familiar Italian face appeared and said that there were some people waiting outside and would really like to meet me. And those people was the whole Inter Milan team. Franco, one of the top lads, had travelled with the team on their bus, and before leaving the grounds made the coach driver pull around and park up, then sending someone up to get me and bring me to where the bus was parked, and they were waiting. The whole team, not a supporters group or friends of the team, but the whole Inter Milan team. Imagine sitting at home and watching your favourite team on the telly, then to get a knock on the door, and when you answer it, there's the whole squad, who's popped around for a cup of tea before they set off. Unfucking real. These people have no limits to how far and what they are willing to do. That's beyond friendship. That's family. But, as much as I wanted to go and meet up with Franco and a team I'd come to love, and as ambitious as I am, I knew it'd be a bit of a mistake, as I'm not exactly one to turn away from any firm. But the thought of me bowling out through a stadium in the middle of White Hart Lane that's not long emptied and still thick with the local supporters wasn't exactly a bright idea. I've done some brave and equally questionable moves before, but this wasn't the time to see how long it would be before people clocked me. With a lump in my throat and a sense of immense gratitude, I said I'd meet up with them on another visit. On a later trip, like all of the previous visits to Milan, Lenny was booked to come along but had fallen really ill at the last minute, so he couldn't make it. So, here I am, going from having an extra set of eyes to one that now meant I was simply more exposed. But with me, I've always enjoyed going into the unknown, and this trip, being an away game, meant venturing further out into the country, and that meant new and unfamiliar territory, thus further isolating me from what I'd grown accustomed to. All of this then makes it an unknown element, but it's one I thrive in, and on, and as a result, I knew I'd be on cloud nine. But knowing I was going to be picked up by one of the old guard, or old boys, Sandro, and it was here I knew that I'd be with family and looked after. Exactly like with Lazio Ultras, everyone knew they had a moral responsibility. Sandro always made sure I got where I needed to, taken care of, and it would only be him carrying that responsibility. Sandro was part of the old school, previous generations of Ultras, who still went to every game and was very much a part of what went on. It can't be emphasised enough with these lads. Loyalty and respect is the backbone and seen throughout. It didn't matter your age, standing or level in any part of Ultra's structure, top or bottom, everyone played a part, and played it well. There's an unquestionable level of loyalty and respect throughout the ranks. Arriving, and after spending several days with the lads and enjoying what was on par with any previous visit, I was given my ticket for the away game. Because of the government crackdown in previous years on extreme levels of violence and monitoring who's visiting the games, they'd introduced travel IDs. Now initially I hadn't thought this was going to be an issue, but after realising my ticket was in a name that didn't even closely resemble mine, I thought it might be a challenge getting into a stadium, and I could run into a problem or two whilst visiting somewhere that was going to be a decent drive away from where I was staying, if not the best part of 1,000 miles from home. But fuck it, I was with a firm that took care of their own. After the coach journey to Verona and arriving at their stadium, we all walked to the entrance of the ground. Now, like I said before, I'd noticed that the name on the ticket wasn't anything close to Carlton Leach, nor did it match that of the travel ID that I didn't have. But even if I tried using my driver's license as a substitute, it still didn't change the fact it didn't match the name that I couldn't even pronounce on the ticket. But it then further dawned on me, what if I can't get in? I'd be stuck outside, and it could very easily kick off, and I'd then get nicked and end up in a prison cell. That, and unable to string a single sentence together in Italian, wouldn't be the best situation for me to end up in. So, I thought I best formulate some sort of plan to ensure that I got in. I looked and sized up each of the stewards that was checking tickets. One in particular looked like I'd be able to get past without too much issue. But, before my thought or plan could be put into action, a group of thousands formed around me, and we all simply went in, en masse, and in force. The old adage, if your name isn't on the list, you're not coming in, didn't work and wasn't part of Inter's MO. 10,000 Inter weren't letting one of their own stand outside simply because some governing body had set some rules. As here, the only rule was Inter, and when it came to decisions and who's coming in, that was a decision of their making, and no one else's. Whether it was a home or away game, when Inter went to watch a game, they went in, and no one was going to tell them otherwise. From then on, I started going to Milan regularly, and each and every time, Franco and all the top people were always the best hosts and supporters during my stay. One group of people that I've failed to mention are the Inters that run the pivot shops. They're the ones who set up and run merchandise stores for the group that then promote everything for Inter Ultras and the games. They always go out of their way in ensuring that both myself and whoever I'm travelling with are kitted out and taken care of. Lovely, caring people. Going to any of the games in the company of Ultras is something to be marvelled at, and the invitation of Franco and the boys is right up there. At the grounds, the love for the game and team is nothing less than heart and soul, life and death. Much like football supporters in England in the 1960s through the early 90s, pure passion and club loyalty, openly displayed by entire generations and supported by the surrounding communities. The other most notable and commendable difference is Ultras never allowed their club history and devotion to be left behind, nor to be seen as some cheap yesteryear motto for what once was. They're always upping their game, and the dedication shown week in, week out, from one generation to the next, is something that they'll never allow to be hijacked or duplicated by a single person or age bracket who feel they've got better ideas, or to dictate a selfish, misguided view or interpretation of a club and its badge. For Ultras, back at the start, is the same as it is today. It is pane e salame, straightforward. It's the club and the game, and you behind them. The support given by an Ultra is that of the 12th man in the team, and their hardline support is the voice of the same 12th man on the field. The curve behind the goal is an area and domain that is strictly Ultra-controlled. The rest of the stadium is assigned and has numbered seats, and those away from the curve have to follow rules. To some, Ultras may be considered a minority or a sample of the team's support, but they maintain a level of support both vocally and openly, that far outweighs any other fan base. Fact, as it was once said, they truly are a whole city all under one tent. Going to a game with any Ultras support base and becoming more than just a guest is an unmatched, excuse the pun, experience, and this is one that will, hopefully, show just that. When you arrive at the San Siro Stadium, where I was to watch my beloved Inter, you have to enter from the back. You're then led up what seems endless stairs until you reach the fourth upper tier of the stadium. When you finally reach the top of this skyscraper of a stadium, being able to look out at what was in front of you, with the sea of heads of fans, it's only then are you able to appreciate just how big the stadium really is. If there was any doubt by a visitor on the amount of people and the level of passion found within, the sound of 70,000 football-loving, passion-driven, lifelong devoted fans will. Now add to that the power and force emanated from 10,000 ultras, all hell-bent in expressing both vocally and physically. Their unquestionable level of commitment each side of the stadium is one that is stronger and bigger than the stadium we were all standing in. The next leg of the journey would be to make your way down to the front of the curve. This is, again, nothing short of 10,000 fanatical, hardened, loyal fans. If you can imagine an immense amount of people standing literally shoulder to shoulder, all packed into one unbreathable space, whose body count doesn't allow you to be able to tell one fan from another, you can get an idea of how many there was just standing in front of us. Anyone would have thought it would have taken an entire game to get through that amount of people, but as I'd witnessed on all my other visits to curves, no sooner as we started to move in the direction of the front of the curve, it was as if an invisible energy just effortlessly forced the en masse of people to part and create a clear path straight to the front. With all of this going on, being led in by Franco, Tony and Jerry, the absolute top of the tree ultras would be enough to leave any top boy from any firm speechless. When we got to what was a space at the front of that crowd, once again makes you realise where you are standing, in a spot that is only reserved for the top man. And it was then, with this continued level of acknowledgement, respect and standing that I have in a circle of people, I knew I was no longer seen or looked upon as a guest. I've now become a person whose presence is seen as one of pure blood. And now, family. I'm now standing in an established position to the right of what is nothing short of the head, the top dog, and a person who instills a level of respect and a following that commands an army of over 10,000 like-minded ultras, who are willing to fight and die for a single man's belief and a multi-generational club and banner's cause. This is the cream of the crop, and it's here that Italy, Milan and those soldiers around you that not only support the club, but also you and everyone around you're with. The depth of that situation is one that can never be understood unless you become part of it. Go to a game and see first-hand ultras in action, you'll feel your bollocks tighten and the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And when they shout, "Oh, la vinciamo noi," being sung repeatedly, "We're going to win," it really is something else. The chants and songs don't last for a few minutes either, when they can go on for 20-30 minutes. It's on the same level as an anthem, plus the banners that are seen at each, and every game is something I've never witnessed at an English match. Each and every game these same banners are taken and displayed. Each one tells an ultra group's history and a story, something I don't think would ever be seen or welcomed at an English football game, as respectively this is an Italian ultra tradition. 10,000 people will carry that banner over the tops of their heads and the crowd, displaying it so it can be seen by the entire stadium. There was another occasion that is without question one that is worth mentioning. It was when Lenny, me, Gemma, Jerry's, one of Inter's main faces, girlfriend Dina and her friends who were visiting from the US, were all flying over at the same time to watch a big game with Inter Milan. In fact, this game would exemplify without question the very meaning of the phrase, a big game, both metaphorically and literally. It had been announced by the governing bodies that after 100 years, it was time to pull down the stadium and build a new one. This news sent shockwaves throughout the football community and the nation as a whole. It also made it a necessity for every red-blooded Italian that ever kicked, handled or been around a ball, supported a team, knew someone that had watched a game and everyone else in between to be at the stadium for what was said to be an historic event. This was to be the last game ever played at both AC and Inter Milan's home stadium. San Siro is one of the largest in the whole of Europe, but more importantly the largest stadium in Italy. Now add that fact to how much history, heritage, places of severe importance, and football means as a whole to both the Italian populace, ultras and Italy, who was very much losing part of her past and cultural identity. Only then can you get an idea of why this was one of the most important games of a generation. And add that it's a derby game. That meant for anyone that wanted to be at the game, this was on the same level as having Christmas, New Year's, and all of your lifelong birthdays rolled into one. The sheer necessity, importance, and cultural value of the game was simply unmeasurable. People of all ages, far and wide, expressed how much they wanted and needed to go, and were probably willing to sell a kidney to get tickets for the game. But the fact remained, their chances were slim to none. It was reported that in excess of 85,000 tickets were needed for a stadium that could only accommodate a little over 70,000. Arriving at Milan airport and being greeted like family had become part of a valued tradition, and as always, my ultra brothers had come through, and in style, a brand new Mercedes multi-passenger arrived and was ready to whisk us off to our pre-arranged hotel. It was also nice to hear that two of the young Cardiff lads we'd met some years before, Josh and Newt, were also in town, and at the same hotel, but told me they needed 2 tickets for the game. These tickets were rarer than rocking horse shit, and the only 2 hopes in the part of the equation was no hope and them having more chance of getting the Hope Diamond, but a quick chat with my interbrothers and all sorted. I made this effort for the boys as one thing I've always respected and valued is loyal friends, so the lads got their tickets and we were ready for probably the biggest game the country had seen in many years. It was reported in one newspaper that the stadium had a record number turn up for the game. Some reports suggest over 90,000 fans. Much like before, when entering the stadium is an experience all in itself, the noise, the people, crowds, are all part of the energy you'll soon experience when the teams are playing. No sooner had we arrived at the stadium, we're entering the curve, but the slight difference here was Gemma and the girls travelling with us. Women, wives, girlfriends, partners, none are allowed in the curve. That area is all business, and unless you've been invited and are part of a certain element or football, it's strictly a no, bar one exception, but I'll come back to that in a moment. So, the ladies have now been led off to the numbered seats and away from the curve, but all the same, in excellent company with friends and family of the Ultras. What made it that much more special for me was how Gemma enjoyed the game, as she said part of the memorable experience was when she helped with the huge banner, it being rolled out over both hers and across thousands of heads, and then seen throughout the stadium, plus the crowd involvement, the excitement, the feeling of being there, plus the banner, and how she fucking loved it. Now, back to the part that will need explaining is the curve, business only and girlfriends, wives, etc. The only exception to that rule is when the top boy's missus is present. In this scenario, it would have been Moreno's other half, Chiara. She was as much Milan's twin sister as she was Inter's mother. As much as both AC and Inter Milan have their strong rivalries and history, there has been an agreement between the firms and the level of violence that is inflicted. This was as a result when some years back, both sides would always turn up firm-handed and tooled up to the eyeballs. Deaths ensued, and not long after, top boys from either side had a sit-down, agreeing that no one should go to a match and never return home. It goes without question. At minimum, banter and fighting will always be part of the deal, but not lads ending up in the ground. There is something special that can only be seen and heard from Ultras during a game, and that's the level of patriotism and pride they have, and that of course is expressed by their chants and songs. The one game that still makes me laugh was when I was front and centre in the Curve Nord. Curve Nord is Inter Milan when playing as home team, Curve Sud is AC Milan, and 10,000 AC Milan Ultras sang out in Italian, "We know you have a special guest amongst you," meaning me, "but you are still shit." And on top of that, it was, and fuck knows how they did it, all choreographed with the lights on their phones, then held above their heads and spelt out, simply unfucking real. It was explained to me when I first started to visit Italy, when you arrive, Italy knows you are here. And that song, Experience and Visit showed that down to a T. There's been countless trips and visits, and each and every time they've always outdone themselves. On one occasion, Gemma and I went out to Milan, and Inter had set us up in a beautiful apartment right in the centre of Milan. For the 5 days we were there, neither our arses or our feet hit the floor. We were wined, dined, taken to unimaginable places. Nothing was an issue, and no place or person wasn't more or less welcoming than the previous. The accommodating on their part is that what you'd imagine reserved for certain elements of society, but the one memory of that visit in particular that holds special meaning was when a surprise birthday party was thrown for me. when the worldwide epidemic started to affect parts of Europe and restrictions were slowly being introduced and affect certain places, I was forced to miss a previous planned trip that would have meant I was there on my 60th birthday. But when I was there on this visit, taken out one evening, walked into a restaurant, seeing the entire place not only decked out in West Ham banners, but my hosts singing, "I'm forever blowing bubbles," and then have staff, other families and people visiting the restaurant singing "Happy Birthday" to me in Italian is, and was a part of my life that I hold as one of extreme value. I have to add that, with my Italian family, loyalty and friendship knows no boundaries, and there are no words that would be of any credit to that experience that Gemma and the people there that night that made it so special. There are a lot of people from the games and within Ultras that hold a special place in my life, but some will always be thought of as the brightest lit candles on a cake made of friendship, love, and loyalty. I feel a great sense of accomplishment when I think of my relationship with Italy. It all started with an invite that led to a handshake, then onto a friendship with Al, Fabrizio, and the Lazio Ultras, shown then equally as much by both Inter and AC Milan. A country, much like England, that has a proud, deep-rooted sense of history and as much love for the game. I will never allow a bad word or untruth be said about my Mediterranean brothers. Their welcoming and hospitality has never known any limits, nor has their willingness to adopt me as one of their own. The most difficult part of visiting Italy is, and as I've experienced firsthand, that Italy knows when you're here, as each and every Ultras outfit already has pre-knowledge of your plans and visit. So, you find a lot of the top boys reaching out and extending a level of hospitality that not only compliments Italians, their welcoming and accommodating nature, but also as a representation of how much Ultras value friendship and loyalty. I found that I had to decide where I was going to hang my hat, or scarf so to speak. Lazio has and will always hold a special place in both my life, and I have an immense level of respect for them, but Inter Milan had found a new sun and are forever in my heart and are my soul. If I was asked to explain the relationship process of Lazio and Inter with me, it would be Lazio was my first serious relationship with Ultras. It will always be one that is respected and held as one of special value and meaning, much like your first girlfriend, the excitement and introduction to what a relationship was and should be. Inter was the next step in learning about what love and dedication was and is in a relationship. I became, I guess you could say, engaged with and set for life with Inter. I would be willing to lay down in the road and stop traffic for Lazio Ultras, but I'd be willing to fall on any number of swords for Inter. That being said, even after aligning with Inter Milan and Lazio as my cousins to her south, as I said earlier, they are one in the same, as each and every visit, both myself and whoever I'm travelling with, are offered a level of friendship and hospitality from various firms, who by all accounts have different and opposite beliefs to that of Lazio and Inter. That being said, I can only ever be respectful and grateful to all. As a sign of how firms can meet under one banner and have a respect for a shared belief, there was one night I was invited out with AC Milan's top boys. Now, being I'm firmly aligned with Inter and AC being their bitter enemies, in fact, the two have the longest reigning rivalry. It then says a lot when both firms can meet and literally sit at the same table so as to enjoy my company. AC have a massive West Ham fan base in their ranks, and if I'm correct, they actually have more West Ham fans than any other firm in the country. Massimo, their top man, is a massive West Ham fan. Respect, and its true meaning, is a word that is honoured and understood by a lot of the top firms in Italy. Over the years, I've had valued experiences. On every visit, each and every time, the passion they have for their club is something that can only ever be felt, never put into words. I mean, how could you write about something that would express and be a reflection of an emotion that then encapsulates what you are willing to commit your whole life to and then have the same willingness to die for? You can't. It's something that can only ever be felt and enjoyed, much like passion and faith. It can't be expressed in something as simple, cold, and unemotional as the written word, and then put into an inanimate object like a book. Trying to do so would be an insult to Ultras and the level of passion they have for life, their club, and the game of football. With the support and friendship that Ultras have given me is something I'll always value and hold high. The only way that same friendship can be, marginally, put into words is, once a door was opened just enough for me to see there was something in another room. On the next visit, that door was opened slightly more, exposing more light and evidence of something even bigger and brighter than the previous visit. The final opening of that door was a welcome and full introduction to a world friendship and brotherhood that is typically only reserved for those born of that environment. When I've been asked and it's been commented why I felt that each faction or group treated me so well, and maybe it was an effort for them to outdo each other, I can say with my hand over my heart, there's never been anything underhanded or an ulterior motive with their actions, and I've always seen their welcoming and friendship as a way in complementing not only themselves, but their country and beliefs. Ultras value friendship and loyalty, and to have that same level of loyalty and friendship returned makes them feel a level of accomplishment between like-minded people. Nothing, and I mean nothing, was ever an issue in simply a beautiful friendship and people. For me, Italy and the people that I hold close to my heart is a country, along with her soldiers who time after time have only ever increased both their loyalty and friendship with me. They have welcomed and made me feel as if they've adopted a son, and for this I hold sacred. My appreciation and respect for my fratelli Italiani is unmeasurable. Now compare that to the level of what we've been left with in today's game back home, and the breed of hipsters and their half-brained, diluted philosophies. Sipping half a light pint out of a plastic cup or a froth-topped corporate brand frappuccino, and sporting half scarves, feeling displaced and offended that not everyone will align with their belief that a new corporate-managed conglomerate mammoth of a stadium is the only way forward. And much like the bastardization of a club, the decimation of the beautiful game, and the shadows these soulless shithouses cast over lifelong loyal fans, it's the same fuckwits who also feel they should be the ones dictating what and how a club is run and supported. So many UK clubs have clowns running what was once a community-based and supported football club and has now become a circus, and equally as damaging are the clueless clowns disguised as supporters paying for the cheap thrill and ride.